what you are describing about finding something good to feel good about has been labeled Pollyanna-ish in a derogatory way, and that's a cultural thing that we seem to all share. Here's my question.
Well, Pollyanna was connected to source energy. Pollyanna's life went very well. Pollyanna lived happily ever after.
Yeah, right.
Don't try to tell people that.
No.
We're just telling you.
Yeah. By attraction, did we create this horror?
Yes. In other words, it's not possible for anything to be experienced that does not come through law of attraction. Everything is. Everything is.
Can you explain a little bit about what we did or how we what we desired in order to make this occur?
We can and we will if you want. But before we do, we would ask the question, is probing in that direction leading you toward feeling better or leading toward feeling worse? In other words, what's your motive in doing it?
Well,
some would say curiosity, understanding. Maybe if we understood it more, we wouldn't do it anymore. And we say, you didn't personally do this. In other words, you weren't the vibrational reason for this. And understanding how others were the vibrational reason for it would only take you further from your connection than to it. That's what we meant earlier when we said if you stand back into a more general place and try to approach it, it serves you better. Have any of you read any of the really old books that are upon your planet? The Bible. That's a good one. Do any of you recall, was there any mention of conflict or war in it? In other words, the whole book, can you find a period of time when physical beings were not at odds? And so if you say, where did this begin? We would say, how long have you got? In other words, even trying to sort out, start right where you are and see if you can figure out who actually launched the attack. And then try to figure out why they did. In other words, what would cause someone to feel so strongly about something that they would be willing to wreak this havoc and in the process take their own life. These were pretty strong reasons that these people were feeling. And so some people in your nation today and beyond are saying, well, we feel like that now. We feel like we would like to go do it to them. And we say, yes, and what caused them to feel like they wanted to come to do it to you? And is doing it to them more likely to make them not want to do it to you? Or more likely to make them want to do it to you? So as you begin to talk about reasons, now we want to go back to what we were saying earlier. Even with all of this, you are not in a more vulnerable place today than you were before. In other words, is there hatred out there? Yes. There will always be those kinds of disagreements. Were they justified in what they did? Yes. Would you be justified in what you did in retaliation? Yes. Were you justified in what you did before they did that? Yes. In other words, there are always reasons, and anyone that's living in the middle of it. There was a young man being interviewed. He was a Palestinian. And he was in jail. He was caught in Israel with a bomb strapped to him, and they were able to catch him and throw him in jail. And when they said to him, why would you do such a thing? Why would you blow yourself up and kill all of those other people? And he said, because they killed my friend. They killed my friend, so I'll kill your friend, then you'll kill. In other words, it's that sort of thing. And the reason that we're drawing your attention back to the Bible or to any point in time is because we want you to understand these differences and these conflicts, heightened sometimes, not so heightened sometimes, are always present within your contrasting environment. You will never reach a place where you are all in agreement. And so, as we are expressing to you here, we are in no way wanting you to feel uncomfortable about your feeling of revenge. We would say to you it is even a natural consequence of what you've come to. Nor do we want you to feel uncomfortable because there are so many that are seeking revenge. In other words, we are not trying to guide you in terms of whether your thought of revenge is a right one or a wrong one. We are wanting to guide you as an individual back into your alignment with source energy. And these things we know. You cannot blame another and reconnect. You cannot scrutinize the details of how it came about and reconnect. You would be lost in the abyss of detail because the stories that you will begin to hear will all sound justifiable. And so what most people do is, rather than try to understand, They just sort of go with the current that is the most dominant. And as you go with the current that is most dominant, you will be no worse off than you have been going with the current that has been dominant. It is just about another issue. Can you get that?
I think so. Does that then apply to my, instead of a national introspection, a personal introspection, to say, I would like to know why I am the way I am by going back into my personal history? Is that a fruitless?
Well, we've never seen it work, and those who have been listening to us have seen us never encourage it. Because, see, what happens is, as you're standing where you're standing, this is where all of your point of attraction is. And it doesn't matter how you got here. The desire that is within you is all that really matters. And so that's why we say, feel triumphant about where you're all standing and the desire that is within you, because it's a powerful attraction of source energy. And now your work is to relax and let in the well-being that you're asking for. Most, as they stand here and they say, I'm not where I want to be, and the reason I'm not is because of that and that and that, it just holds you in this place longer and longer and longer. But as you say, I'm not where I want to be, where I would rather be is there, and then you turn your attention to what there is and try to imagine that, now you achieve vibrational harmony with that. Good time for a segment of lunch. We'll continue with you when we return. And are you refreshed? We see you have returned to your natural rowdy selves.
You spoke beautifully, I thought, about why reasons not to go there, and there being the reasons for the tragedy. And also you spoke about not going there personally, the reasons, trying to find out the reasons in a psychoanalytic way about why I am the way I am.
It's sort of like saying, when I ponder this result, I get disconnected. So I think I will ponder the reason for the result and therefore get disconnected.
My sense is that psychotherapists, in at least the ones that I have known, are being drawn toward coaching, which is, in a way, leaving that search for the past and the reasons in the past and coming into the moment.
Good.
Is that a trend that it's just me? Am I just seeing that? Or?
Well, we agree with you. More and more people are beginning to realize that if they have been dealing with a client for 20 years about the same issue, that maybe there's a better way.
I've actually asked a lot of questions, and maybe my time is up, but those are beautiful answers.
We've enjoyed this interaction. Is there something more?
Well, yes, actually there is.
Now that you mention it.
There is a sense that, and maybe it's just me, but maybe I'm sensing it in the culture at large, that we can do something, an action can be taken that is not in a retribution kind of mode, that we can culturally come together to, rather than cause more hatred, to cause more understanding. I would like to know, and I know it begins with me, but what is there that can be done to prevent more hatred?
Well, when even one like you sets forth that intention, and of course there are many like you that are already setting forth that intention, then these are other desires that are born out of all of this that then begin to be answered. In other words, you begin hearing people that are offering some balance to it. One man said, it is interesting as people begin to worry about people that look like we believe the terrorists look, because approximately 1/3 of the population of the planet sort of looks like that. And then he went on to say that a large percent of the population, 20% in fact, comes from that religious background, so to speak. And so what begins to happen as more and more people use the power of their logic, they begin to understand that it's too big to throw everything in one basket. And so then more understanding begins to come forth. And there are thousands of people in places of great influence that are beginning to speak that message. And so already there is a greater understanding relative to all of that. Come back to the heart of what you were getting at and offer it to us again.
I sense that we can do something on a higher vibratory level than simply strike back. And I don't know how I can bring that influence to a larger stage?
Well, it isn't your job to do it. In other words, as you hold the thought, you serve as a sort of satellite dish that allows the signal that's already been beamed in to beam in even more specifically. But we want to give you something else in the attitude of further soothing you and more back into connection with source energy. And that is, let us tell you the reason first, and then we'll give it to you fully. Let's say that someone is wanting something off this subject of a personal nature. And so they hold a desire, and they do not have any idea how to achieve this desire. And then someone comes to them and says, I believe this action will help you achieve this desire. And they don't know too much about it, but they have belief in the person offering them the information. And so in their taking the advice or the help from the other, they actually line up their energy, because all that has to happen is that they hold a desire that they believe. So what we're saying to you is, we don't really want to speculate about any action that might take place and call it right or wrong, because depending upon where you're standing, you might call the same action right or wrong. We've talked about how if the firemen come when your house is on fire and they spray water in it and extinguish the fire, you say, this was a very good action. But if they come on a day when there is no fire and just knock out your windows and spray water in your house, then you say this was not a good action, even though it was the same action. So there are so many variables to all of this, you will never get everyone to agree on the action. But our point is this. Let's say that your government takes a very strong action that, when you focus upon it, actually hurts your heart. In other words, it is so much stronger and so much more than you would want them to take. And as you focus upon it, it might serve to disconnect you further and take you further from what you want. But there might be many others who have a desire that when they see that same action, because they don't know what to do, and because they believe that the government does know, or that the government has more information, or that the government does protect them, as they see the government offer that action, it may cause them to line up. You get a sense of what we were talking about? So rather than trying to do, we talked about this earlier off this subject, although it's all the same subject, isn't it? And we said to you, to our friend who was sitting here, as you are asking, and the universe is answering, and you put yourself in the place of allowing, whatever it takes for you to put yourself in the place of allowing, now well-being will be returned to you. And so, if we were standing in any of your physical shoes, we would not try to figure out what's right for the world. In other words, several of you are saying, I'm glad that I don't sit in the seat that has to make those decisions. And we say, but you sit in the seat that allows the well-being to flow to you or not, and that is the most important seat that you could be sitting in. And so we would not try too hard to get it all sorted out to find the one right answer. We would say instead, there are so many people that are asking individually. It's an interesting thing. As Esther began talking to us about this, her first response was one of amazement and one of horror and one of strong concern and one of upheaval. And then, as she listened to us a little bit, she began to come back into her sense of well-being. And then the next thing that occurred to her was that as we were responding to her questions, she could feel that we are responding to the questions on a global basis, not just the questions on a national basis. And for a moment, it almost surprised her. And she said to Jerry, somehow I think that Abraham is our teacher, meaning looking out for our well-being. I forget that Abraham is conscious and aware of and wanting well-being everywhere. And this is the place that you must come to if you are to be in concert with who you really are, because your inner being will not choose a national side. Your inner being is wanting well-being for all and understanding that well-being is never being deprived. In other words, there is never someone standing on one side of an issue that is so wrong that well-being is being cut off from them, and somebody else is standing on the other side of the issue, and source energy says, yes, we've thought this all out. We've been listening for centuries, and we've decided that you are the blessed ones, and we'll help you defeat you.